Okay, awesome. Here we go, let's start. Okay. So you give and you give and you give, but at the end of the day, you feel drained. But you can't seem to work enough to fix your problems nonetheless everybody else's. Have you ever felt like that before? Many people often do. And the problem is they have a boundary problem. They have a lack of boundaries. So for this reason, I believe that everyone should learn how to be able to set intentional and healthy boundaries in their relationships. So I'll begin by talking about what personal boundaries are and why they're so important. Then I'll talk about the benefits of having healthy boundaries, and then the consequences of not having healthy boundaries. And then lastly, we'll look at what the Bible has to say about boundaries. So think about walking through Ireland. It's got great open spaces, it's got beautiful green grass and trees, and as you look, you see some fences, and maybe some even those stone kind of walls, short walls that they tend to have. What do you think when you look over at that kind of thing? What's the first thought that you have on your mind?
I want to jump over those walls if they're short.
Well, you automatically know that from here over is somebody's property, somebody's land. And from the other side over is somebody else's property, someone else's land. So we understand how property boundaries work. So when I talk about these invisible relational boundaries that need to be created, think about how they're the same way as those property boundaries. I'm showing that similarity between them because they're both boundaries, they're just different kinds of boundaries. And they both serve the same purpose and have the same effects. According to Google, a boundary is a line that marks the limit of an area, a dividing line. The Merriam-Webster dictionary says that a boundary is something that shows where one area ends and another area starts, or a point and limit that indicates where two things become different. Now, with personal boundaries, this line is invisible, but the purpose is the same. It's there first to teach me and everybody else what is me and what is not me, according to Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, who wrote the book Boundaries, from which most of the ideas that I will present to you come from. In their book, they ask the readers to consider a world where there are no boundaries for a moment. There are no fences around houses. There are no state lines. There are no stop signs. There are no danger signs. See how that could be a problem? How that could cause chaos? Boundaries of all kinds are important to show what is whose property and responsibility, what things are for, and what should and should not be done. So now that I've given you a really general idea of what boundaries are and what they're for, I'll discuss some of the benefits of placing healthy boundaries in your life. So to begin, one of them is that boundaries are designed to help keep the good in and keep the bad out. Skin is a really good example of that. That's the most foundational and basic boundary that we have all ever had to begin with. So it's designed to keep everything that's keeping you alive and healthy inside and keep it out of the way of things from the outside like bacteria and infection that can cause that kind of thing to become unhealthy. In relationships, there's an invisible line drawn and it says, this is what's healthy and what's outside is not. This is what should be done, this is what shouldn't be done. And it reflects your values and your care for the other person. So see how this kind of keeps the good in and the bad out? It says this is how we should interact in our relationship. Boundaries serve as a self-protection mechanism that we use to speak to other people and to relate to other people even early on in life. As toddlers, we learn to say that pretty little word, no. In her article titled, Why Saying No in Your Relationship is a Good Thing, Margarita Tarkovsky stresses that no is a boundary word, and it is the first invisible boundary that we put up. And it's important for others to hear that no, and if it's appropriate, for them to respect that. We also need to be okay saying no, because those boundaries are established for a reason, and neglecting them would come with problems. However, some people think that having boundaries is being selfish, is trying to keep people away from them, and is not wanting for them to be giving to other people, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Boundaries are actually a way to show that you love and respect someone. So for example, if I'm in a relationship with somebody of any kind, if I decide to draw a line, it's not because I'm trying to keep them away or forbid things, but more it's these are the things that I think are appropriate and okay in our relationship, and these are the things that are not, and I don't want them getting in. So that's kind of how that would work in a relationship kind of setting. Boundaries are there really to show a sign of that love and respect. It may be tough love even. What's over there on your side is your responsibility, and I don't always have to jump to that. But that person actually will end up better at the end after that. In fact, a lack of boundaries is a lack of respect for myself, and it allows that person to disrespect me as well. So what really needs to happen is for me to care about myself enough to build those kinds of boundaries, and then that person is allowed to love and respect me by keeping those boundaries. So this all leads to healthy relationship. But with benefits of good boundaries, there come consequences if you don't have good boundaries. So one, like I mentioned earlier, is negative feelings of feeling lonely, drained. You can even feel resentment towards the other person. And this is something that comes out of, if you don't love and respect me, I'm gonna feel that, because feelings are strong indicators of what's going on around you, of when things are going well and when things are not going well. You feel drained and resentful because there are no boundaries keeping you feeling healthy and happy. And then people can come into your life intentionally and actually wreak havoc and take advantage of the lack of boundaries that you have, robbing you of your joy and peace. And you're vulnerable to that because your defense against that isn't built up, isn't set up. Or maybe your boundaries are way too high and you don't let anyone in and you don't do anything for anybody else. You'll still feel those negative feelings of loneliness and misery because that's not a healthy place to be either. So with inappropriate boundaries, do you see how that possibly instead lets the bad in and keeps the good out? This is never going to lead to emotional, mental health for you or your relationships. So to finish, I want to talk about what the Bible has to say about boundaries. Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend use verses and more to show how relevant boundaries are as an issue, not even just to us, but to God as well. He talks about things that are healthy and good for us, and one thing that he wants to talk about is boundaries. So he first teaches us that we have to have boundaries with ourselves. Proverbs talks a lot about this, about having boundaries away from sin and things that are wrong. Proverbs 22:3 says, "A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences." This is what boundaries are all about. Another translation uses evil instead of danger, talking about things that are wrong. You need to set boundaries on yourself based on what God says is right and healthy, or not right and evil. And you also need to see the danger in not setting boundaries with you and other people. Lastly, I'll share one more verse, again from Proverbs, although there are so many other verses that I could talk about. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life." In the book Boundaries, it says, in reality, these boundaries define your soul, and they help you guard it and maintain it. So what more reason to establish boundaries in your life? Your heart, which is precious, needs to be guarded against any evil and sin, against other people who are trying to attack you, against negative feelings that result in a lack of boundaries, because your heart is the source of life. You make your choices, you live your life based off of what's in your heart and the state of your heart. So your heart is worth protecting. So I've given you just a brief understanding of what boundaries are, what they're for, good benefits of it, consequences if you don't have them, and then lastly we've talked about scripture. So I hope that by giving you these reasons for building healthy boundaries, you feel compelled to learn a little bit more about them. I've only given you so little information and there's so much more to know about them. And being able to do that yourself, you not only learn about it, but then you can put it into practice in your life if you haven't already. So Dr. Dana Gonta, a psychologist, says that setting and sustaining healthy boundaries is a skill. Unfortunately, it's a skill that many of us don't learn. I challenge you all to learn it and to craft it, because it will determine the rest of your life.